Alrighty, let's go ahead and kick things off. Um, so great. It looks like we have even a larger audience than the last office hours, which is great. Folks are finding the new time. So in terms of updates, we're now kind of midway into January. We're starting to finalize kind of what our backlog and plans look like for at least the next 2 or 3 months. We are starting to feel pretty good about what we're doing in the .NET space. I already kind of shared with y'all last time what those look like. Remember, it was investments in more AI connectors, investments in more memory connectors, and then, of course, agents, making agents a central key part of Semantic Kernel. So all that's happening in the .NET side. For folks on the call, it might be a minority of you that are interested in Python. We're starting to finalize what the Python backlog actually looks like. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can briefly take a look at what that looks like. So if we go to, let's just go directly to the Semantic Kernel repo, and we go to projects. If y'all have never done this before, this is the best way to kind of see what the roadmap or backlog of the core Semantic Kernel team looks like. Go ahead and select Semantic Kernel. And you can see everything that we're currently working on as a team here. But what y'all are probably more interested in is if you want to know kind of what's coming up next, you can go to the full backlog tab. And you can both see what's being prioritized on the .NET side of the house and even Python. So if we pull up the Python, what we're doing right now is we're prioritizing all of the super uber large breaking changes that are extremely disruptive, right, on our path towards V1 of Python. So things like renaming skills to plugins, replacing SK context with kernel and kernel arguments, doing a bunch of renaming stuff. And the hope is that if we can get these really disruptive things done by February, that opens us up to finish all of the other V1 features that I currently have marked as high done so that we can have a V1 of the Python SDK. You'll notice when you look at this kind of list, we've started adding these tags called needs help to them. And this is going to become our kind of bat signal for, hey, we are interested in the community helping, participating, creating PRs. So these are really great candidates for you to come in. I know you can't assign yourself, but go ahead and leave us a comment in the issue, and we can go ahead and work with you and get that assigned. And as part of this new year, I'm just going to be frank, we weren't the best team for community members to like create PRs, for us to approve them in a timely manner and get them merged in. One of our goals in 2024 is to greatly improve that process. So get excited. The first way that we want to help you as a team to contribute back to Semantic Kernel is just being more forthcoming and transparent on what we think is a good community issue to work on. And that starts with those needs help tags. So that's in the Python space. I'll take a quick pause and see if there's any questions from anyone in the Python community, if they have any questions on this in particular, and we'll keep moving. Okay. The other thing I'll share in the Python space is we do have the Semantic Kernel development office hours that happens right after this every other week. This week we have Java, but the following week we'll have Python. Again, if you're interested in contributing, definitely attend those syncs so that we can handhold you through creating some of these PRs and go a little bit more technical into the things that we're changing. And the last thing I'll share with Python is we're working on a blog post. If you remember back in last year, we had a blog post in the .NET side that basically provided the roadmap of everything to expect with V1, and we kind of shared all the changes and collected feedback from all of you. We're going to be recreating this for Python so that as a Python developer, you know everything that is subject to change or break as part of our process of moving it to V1. We want to be extremely transparent. Okay. All right. So that's everything in the V1 space. I'm going to circle back real quick to the .NET side of the house. I mentioned that our key focus for this next couple months is more AI connectors, more memory connectors, and agents. And we want to be able to be better at working with the community on accepting PRs to add in these new connectors, whether they're memory or AI. And so one of the things that we're doing this sprint, so this week and next week, is we are creating ADRs for how are we actually going to support these different areas over the long term. So if you're interested in kind of watching us create our strategy, watch out for the PR for each of these different ADRs. Leave comments, especially on the contribution strategy that we have. Once those get merged in, that'll be kind of the rules, the way we will all kind of work together in order to build a really healthy library of connectors for Semantic Kernel. So get excited for that. And in these the issues, you can already kind of see what we are planning on to prioritizing in these different areas. Okay. And the goal is, so I said Monday, we're going to have a blog post on kind of the roadmap for V1 of Python. On Tuesday, I know there's been some people asking me, hey, where's the overall roadmap of Semantic Kernel? The plan is on Tuesday of next week, we'll have a blog post and an accompanying video kind of going over all of our roadmap plans for Semantic Kernel. So that is all that I have to share today from the Semantic Kernel side. I'm going to take a quick pause. I see quite a few other names and faces on the call from the Semantic Kernel team. Is there anything that I've missed that y'all want to call out? Mark?
Yeah, maybe just to mention that we've updated the .NET version, and we published a release yesterday, like version 1.1. I'll paste the release notes actually into the chat so people can see. There's lots of kind of like bug fixes and small enhancements have kind of gone in. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Yes. Snap to the latest and greatest. And no breaking changes. Yay! Okay, cool. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the chat. It looks like we have one question that Mark's already started answering. I'll go ahead and read out loud so that we can have a conversation for folks watching the recording. I believe there's a bug with the agent auto function calling. It does not call plugins. Do you know if this has been identified by the dev team? And then Mark replied back, we have seen some issues with function calling when using certain models. Let me see if I can find the issue. So if you're using the Azure OpenAI deployed models, we are seeing some issues with, I think the 0614 or 13, I forget the number. That one, sometimes it throws an error saying, hey, it can't find the tool parameters. It's still expecting the legacy function parameter. So we're working with the Azure AI team on getting that fixed. It appears to be a problem with the SDK. We're not entirely sure, but we're investigating that. And then we're also experiencing an issue with the GTB4 model deployed on Azure OpenAI, where sometimes no function comes back, and we don't expect it and we kind of error out. And again, we're working with the Azure OpenAI SDK team to kind of come up with a solution on that space. Steve, I'm curious if those were kind of the challenges that you were facing if you're using Azure OpenAI or if you're using OpenAI directly. That might help us better understand if this is something similar or something different.
Yeah, Matt, I'm actually on GPT-4's preview release for the Turbo, going directly to OpenAI. So I'm not using Azure model at all for that. So it's strange because the manual method works fine, and that's what I'm about to roll a new version out into production for my product. But it just seems like the auto function calling is not working, and that's with the latest 1.1. I could have swore it was working a couple weeks ago when I was doing some early testing with the agents, but yeah, the latest version is not working. So I could try to dig in. I wasn't sure if there was already an item posted, but it sounds like he just linked an item. Mark just linked an item, so I'll just add to that issue.
Yes, definitely double check if that's the same issue you're having. The one Mark linked to was the stepwise planner, so it might be different. And if so, please create a new issue. We can start diving in.
Yeah, I think that the issue I linked to may be an Azure OpenAI related problem. Like, so yeah, if it's different, if you create an issue, we'll get a test built for it, and yeah, we'll figure out a fix.
Perfect. Thanks.
All righty. Okay. Okay, so that's the one question that we have so far. If anyone else has a question, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand or keep sharing your questions in the chat. So Monik asks, while using Planar, getting an answer like this, not showing the result, but giving the JSON on the result, the price target of Google is value, and then some JSON value, and we're using a Planar. Manik, if you want to come off mute, perhaps share kind of what you are expecting. I'm assuming what you're expecting is more of the price target of Google is, and just like, I guess in this value, it'd just be like 180 instead of a JSON value. Is that correct? Yes, he says yes. And I'm assuming you're using the handlebars planner and is creating a plan where it's using curly brace, JSON, and maybe the value of the thing that's coming in. I would try a couple things. You might want to try some prompt engineering of the goal. So explicitly say in the goal, don't include JSON, just include the value property of the stock market object. Play around with how specific you do or do not need to be, and that should help the model do a better job. I suspect the reason why it's so game for providing JSON is because that's kind of what all the few shot examples look like inside of our planner. On that point, one of our goals with improvements to the planners is to actually make each of the different regions of our planner prompt customizable, so that if you wanted to, you could actually change the example. If you wanted to, you could have different sets of logic. If you wanted to, you could enable or disable things like conditions or loops. That is on our backlog, just as a extremely transparent to the community. Our primary dev that has been working on planners is currently on holiday for this month. So once they get back, we'll be able to drive faster momentum in the planner space. Okay. We do know there's at least half a dozen different issues on the handlebars, so that we can get to parity of what y'all were used to on things like the sequential planner, so that y'all can use those reliably. Okay. Monica also asked, when should we use a planner versus an agent? And when you say agent, I'm assuming you're maybe referring to the work that we're doing with integrating with the Assistance API, or maybe even the auto function calling that's baked into the OpenAI SDK. I will share what I do, my kind of thought process. My default is almost to always use the thing that is most baked in to the model. What the model has been trained for, is specialized for, is being sold as, right? And so for most of you all on the call, if you are using OpenAI models or even some of the other chat completion models that do have function calling, that's function calling, right? And the more you can use function calling through auto function calling or through the agents, you'll likely have better, more accurate results, right? So I would say like 80% of the time, I would expect y'all to use those types of solutions, and even kind of architect how you query the model to kind of more fit function calling, right? And so that's coming up with plugins that can easily be kind of called by the agent in this chain of thought manner. There are times, however, where that doesn't work. And the example that we provide in our documentation is if you're asking the LLM to add numbers 1 through 100, having the LLM call the add function 100 times is not going to be great, because each one of those calls is another call to LLM, and you're probably looking at a substantial bill at that point, right? And so for scenarios where you do need this additional kind of coding logic, for loops, if statements, what have you, that's when we'd recommend, oh, you might want to try something like the handlebars planner, right? So that's kind of the decision matrix I would use, is start with auto function calling until it just doesn't make any sense, where you need all of the logic kind of baked into a single prompt, and then upgrade to something like the handlebars planner. Okay. And the reason I say that is, if you've used the handlebars planner, it's still not perfect, right? It is in preview. We're working out some of the kinks. It still does do some hallucinations. If you target it down to a specific task, it can do wonders, and it's kind of magical when it works. But if you're trying to do something in production today, building something like on top of the function calling is key. Okay, so that's my answer there. Artur asked, apologies for a super basic question. No apologies necessary. It's quite new to Semantic Kernel and trying to see if there's anything better than Chat Copilot from a sample accelerator perspective that has, and you list out a bunch of different features, web connectivity, the RAG pattern, using Planner, maybe even Python based so that it can be run through prompt flow. Chat Copilot has a lot of this functionality, and it's .NET, which unfortunately means it's difficult to hack from a kind of a new person's perspective to actually get started. So I guess what I would recommend is we have some samples in our Learn site, learn.microsoft.com. If you go to any of those pages that references them, there's a link. In fact, I want to go ahead and share my screen. There's a link that actually goes to the full documentation, and we have the same. Let's go ahead and click here. We have the same kind of solution for both C# and Python, right? These are probably simpler than what you need. You kind of list out a bunch of different features. I don't believe any of our samples it has a kitchen sink approach and adds all those things in. That is something we're aware of, and we're wanting to add that to our Learn documentation. But this might be a decent way of getting started, especially if you're coming from the Python world. The other thing I would highly recommend that a lot of folks aren't super aware of, and it's probably the gold standard of looking for samples that have the latest and greatest, is inside of both .NET and Python, there are sample folders, and there's a folder called kernel syntax examples. And there's a lot of them. That's because there's a lot of functionality in Semantic Kernel. But if you have a question about how something works, how a particular feature works, there's a very high likelihood that there is an example showing how that API, how the SDK actually does its magic, like for all the agent stuff. In fact, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different samples kind of showing different capabilities or possibilities with this code. The reason I like recommending these kernel syntax examples is on the semantic kernel side, the way we kind of develop internally is whenever we build a new feature as part of the release process, the development team is expected to, one, add a sample, right? And as of this last week, all of these samples are part of our integration tests. So we can guarantee that all of these things are up to date and are working, right? We are planning on doing the same thing for all of our learn samples, right? They're all going to be moved into the same repo so that we can test them. But in time being, if you're looking for the latest and greatest, you know it always works, you want to go really deep, kernel syntax samples is kind of your place to go. Okay. All righty. And then Artur has a follow-up. Thank you, Matthew. I've been through the tutorials. It was worth a shout. So many accelerators around. We'll go through the samples next. Yes. And I'm going to take this as kind of do an aside. We've gotten a lot of really great feedback on our docs. We know they need to be improved, and our samples need to be improved in that space. One of the best pieces of feedback that I've gotten is today our documentation kind of does too much on one page. So if we go to, let's go to this templatizing prompts article. In this one article, it's both conceptual, it's trying to teach you what a templatized prompt is, and it also kind of bakes in a tutorial. And the expert doc people in Microsoft told me that when you do that, you're basically meaning that the conceptual content can't be as good as it can be, and the tutorial can't be as good as it can be because it's constantly being neutered in order to actually be sit side by side with the conceptual docs. So as we make our next kind of major changes to our docs to respond to all of the great feedback that you and the community provided and others at Microsoft have provided, we're going to be separating the conceptual from the tutorials. And what I'm excited about is we'll be able to build more complex samples and tutorials that accompany our docs so that our tour, like, we should as a semantic kernel team have a doc, a tutorial that walks through something that has web connectivity, has a RAG pattern, that can do kind of this turn by turn with a planner, right? So that's now on our backlog, and hopefully over the next month we'll get that shipped so that you can start referencing that as learning material as well. Okay. So Simon asks, is there any semantic kernel GitHub issue discussing the next steps for the best simple usable sample that will replace Chat Copilot, or is that being discussed internally only? Right now it's at the internal level. We have a internal project that has a code name and everything. So I'm not going to go into super fine-grained details on that. I will share we've gone ahead and we're creating a internal repo on the semantic kernel side, and we're starting some of these more advanced capabilities that we're seeing pop up in the wild, like agents working together, doing things. So I'll let your imagination kind of run wild there. So that may turn into a public repo that I'm hoping can help with the replacing Chat Copilot. The other thing that we want to do is, I mentioned these more full samples, full tutorials that actually do more robust end-to-end things that you would want to build. We want to show how to deploy those two teams, to deploy them to a web chat controller, to white label them and what have you, right? And so we believe that will also be a really good way of replacing Chat Copilot so that you have something easy to use in kind of the same vein. Okay. Jordan asks, how do you recommend integrating the chat completion experience, which allows you to use chat history, interact with the user, with planners? We can't pass the chat history to the planner. Basically, yeah, how do you work with these things together? Very, very good question. What I've been doing in the samples in the doc site is actually using planners as a plugin. So you'll have kind of your Uber chat completion, chat history, right? Where you have the agent talking to the user and they kind of go back and forth, right? And if you have auto function calling, you can start calling functions within plugins to do things that the user wants, right? And as I mentioned earlier, for your 80% use case, that should work and you should be happy. There'll come a time, though, where there's a class of problem that is particularly complex, where you either need to use one of our planners or you need to use a planner that you built, right? So you need some sort of a way to say, hey, agent, there's this new request from the user that's kind of hard to understand. Instead of just you trying to figure it out, send it off to a planner that is smarter in this particular domain to accomplish the user's need. And if you create that intent as a planner, I think in the samples I have a math solver plugin, a math solver function. If any question comes in that's related to math, the LLM doesn't try to solve it itself with auto function calling. Instead, it'll use auto function calling to call the planner, right? And it can pass all of the contextual information that the planner actually needs, i.e. the goal, to actually complete the request, right? So that's kind of a pattern that I started using and seeing quite a bit of success with. As we build out these more fuller samples, we'll be leaning more into that. But at a high level, that's how I'd recommend it. Think of a planner as just another plugin or another function that you can give to the Uber chat for those hard to solve problems for an agent. Right. So if we keep going, Simon asks, what is the level of maintenance for those starters? That could be an interesting starting point for showcase basic functionality. Thanks. Great question. They are a bit languishing right now. We have an issue somewhere. Mark, I don't know if you have it on top of your mind, but our current plan is to take the ones that are actually useful, which there's only like a handful of them. We're actually going to bring those into the main repo so that they're easier to discover. They're kind of your easy way of kind of getting started with Semantic Kernel, and then we'll sunset that repo. But yes, we think starters are important. That might not be the best home for them. We will get them updated to V1 as part of this migration into the main repo. Okay. Steve comments, it would be great to have more architecture examples, agents, plugin architecture as well. I couldn't agree more. That's some other feedback that we've gotten on our docs is we don't have any diagrams at a high level of how all these pieces come together. There's also, I'm blanking on the name, but there's actually a home in Azure where all these like architecture diagrams live. So we want to work with those experts to create architecture diagrams that Azure engineers in particular and architects in particular are familiar with, so that they can take a look at that and see, oh, this is how you build a application that uses Semantic Kernel. While I have this audience, this is by no means is a replacement for actually giving what y'all need, which is architecture diagrams. But the advice that I would give y'all is the more you can turn these things into microservices, so a service per plugin, a service per agent, right? Really make these things small so that you can easily create tests for them and evaluations to make sure that they're performing correctly. You can then use the Open API import functionality within Semantic Kernel to allow agents to talk to your plugin service or agent 1 service to talk to agent 2 service, right? So as we build out our architecture diagrams, that'll be kind of one of the big recommendations that we'll provide folks. Okay. Steve asks, this example is great one for adding to docs blogs. More semantic kernel design patterns are super useful for folks. I'm assuming this was referring to actually, Steve, if you don't mind being really explicit and telling me which one I was talking about at the time, so I could make sure that that actually happens.
Yeah, I think it was your previous example when you're chatting about the, you know, how the agents can then have to call something like a planner for something more advanced, or a rephrase skill, or, you know, contextual type of skill or planner. I think, you know, I've run into those scenarios as well. And so the auto function calling can then call something that needs a little bit more contextual planning, or you know, some more semantic reasoning. I think that's a really common architecture. I've been asked those questions in Discord as well. And so I think having some architectural diagrams on here's kind of the simplistic connection for an agent to plugins, but then when you get those tough scenarios, here's how you kick it off. Here's how you design that planner. I know you said you just had updated the handlebars documentation, and that's something I'm looking forward to diving into myself personally. But I think those more and more examples are just going to help the community in general.
Yes, I'm going to share what we have so far. Here's the initial example of using a planner as a plugin. What I really liked, what you kind of described, was if we make this into an actual tutorial, we can then add things like, oh, here's the architecture diagram. Here's kind of the reasoning behind it. So I'm really happy about the feedback folks gave me of like separating things out as conceptual and tutorials, because I can see a whole tutorial on using planners as plugins. So cool, yeah, we'll definitely do that. Are there any examples of this planner as plugin architecture you're describing? Brett, I just linked to, actually, let me go ahead and share my screen just to walk folks through it. So in the number 11 planner sample in our Learn site, let's look at the program first. So it's super simple, right? We create our chat completion, we start a conversation, and it's just your standard loop, right? It's using the auto function calling. And right now, we only give it one plugin. You can imagine multiple different plugins for different types of planners, but this particular solution just has a single plugin, which is the math solver, right? And if we look at what the math solver actually is, we can see all it takes in as a input to this function for the math solver plugin is the problem or the goal for the planner, right? And what's nice about treating this as a plugin is we can use the attributes to really describe to the auto function calling parent exactly what the planner needs in order to be successful, right? So in this case, I had to do some prompt engineering to ensure that it fully described the actual math problem. When I first wrote this, I just said the math problem to solve, and it wouldn't give me all the information that I needed. But I found if I said, hey, give me 2 to 3 sentences, it would actually fully describe everything that was necessary. And then I could create the planner, create the plan, and execute the plan and return the results, right? And what I really like about this pattern is right now I just have this single problem input, which kind of just gets shoved in as the goal. But you can imagine start doing more complex things, right? Maybe you have a particular planner for evaluating or auditing a order, like determining like does this need approval or not, right? You could accept as an input many different attributes. Hey, like this is all the products inside of the order. This is the total amount of how much people want to purchase. Hey, this is who's purchasing it. Hey, this is their history. You can include a lot more context, and then you can fine tune and prompt engineer, figure out the best way of taking all those different inputs and give it to a planner, right? So it gives you more control over what that context is that's being given to the planner. And then once this is all defined, yeah, you just give it to the Uber agent. You give it to the auto function calling chat completion service, and then it'll be smart enough in order to get all of the required inputs and pass it to the planner. So definitely take a look at that. And the feedback's loud and clear. We should definitely have like an actual formal tutorial walking through how to build this and some of the other considerations that you might have. Okay. Alrighty. Thanks. When is it better to use memory versus calling out to the API via a native plugin? I think I blogged about this once. Let me just double check. If so, we can take a. I always like pictures. I always like pictures. Aha. Okay. Share my screen. So for RAG, actually before I start sharing, for RAG, the ultimate thing that you need to do is make sure that the LLM has some sort of context so that it's grounded. And when you ask a question about like, hey, what color is the car I'm about to buy, I can use that context to go, oh, it's blue, instead of hallucinating something random, right? And what Jordan's question is basically asking is, when should I, what type of techniques can I use to actually populate that context, right? There's a couple different ways that you can kind of tackle the problem. The first kind of dimension I would have you consider is whether or not you templatize the information into the actual prompt, always provide that context, or if you want to dynamically pull that context in, right? When I say dynamic, what I mean is you've given the agent or the AI all these different APIs or plugins that it can use to pull in its own context, right? The math plugin, the Microsoft Graph plugin, all these different plugins, right? And so if you ask it a question, it can decide which information to actually pull, put inside of its context, and then generate a message, right? And the value of this is if your users are asking a very broad set of questions and you don't know which context to actually put inside of that context window, you kind of have to rely on the agent to do that for you. But if you do know, hey, every time this agent gets a request, I know the user details, or I know what product they're looking at, right? You can actually, this is to me the value of the semantic kernel templating engines. You can create a template that just automatically pulls in that information for the agent. That saves you an entire LLM call, right? That saves you an entire LLM call because you just templatize that information, you pulled it in, give it to the agent, and it can immediately start generating messages, right? So that's one dimension I would look at things. Can you save time, save money by templatizing the RAG information? Or do you need to use dynamic RAG with function calling? Right? And then the other dimension that you kind of want to think about is where are you pulling the data, right? So Jordan kind of calls out two options. There's memory or these like vector databases. There's APIs that pull to things. You might do web searches, right? There's all these different flavors, right? And I think it's really dependent on what you're actually trying to achieve. I personally have become less enamored with vector databases and memories because a lot of the enterprise scenarios that we care about, you need to pull sales information, approval information, like information that is highly volatile. It's always being updated. It has very complex RBAC, right? Only certain people can see the data, right? And as soon as you start getting into these highly updatable, secure elements, I would highly recommend going down like the API route, right? Because with function calling, these agents are pretty good at calling APIs, right? And they can pull this information down. You don't have to worry about things like chunking and storing into vector databases and what have you, right? When would you move to more of a vector database that you would then query? I would say only when you need it, right? And you only really need it when the data that you're trying to query is very large. So very large documents, entire PDFs or manuals of information, right? There's no APIs to get a specific paragraph in a user manual, right? And so that's when you would have to basically create your own API using a vector database to help you search those documents, right? Think of vector databases, think of memory as just a custom API that you are building to search a document, right? So going back to your question, when do I use memory or an API? I would say you're always using some sort of API. The question you should ask yourself is like, does that API already exist? Or do I have to do additional hard work to create my own search experience on top of the document that I'm wanting to perform RAG on top of? Hopefully that helped. Hopefully that helped. And then Steve also mentions natural language to SQL can be amazing when done right. Also agree. Like again, that's SQL is kind of like an API. When done right is a key set of words there. So you might have to do some prompt engineering. And I guess what I've seen, kind of going to my first comment at the beginning of the hour, whenever you can, use the features native to the model. The OpenAI model does not have a native NL to SQL thing. It does have function calling, right? So the more you can express the usage of your table as an API, as a native function, as a plugin, so that it can use auto function calling, the better your application will be, the more accurate it will be. Okay. And then yes, I'll go ahead and share the link to the blog I just kind of showed. It was in the space of the new agents or assistants that we were building, but the same kind of principles kind of apply to any sort of RAG pattern. Okay. All right, I want to do a quick time check. So these have been very great questions. Thank you for bringing them. We have about 10 minutes left. Feel free to keep dropping in questions. But as we wrap things up, the last thing I want to share is we did create a new, we call them distribution groups inside of Microsoft. It's just an email address for our office hours. So it's SK office hours, Semantic Kernel office hours at Microsoft.com. If you have a particular burning question and you want to get answers to them outside of office hours, or you want to like make sure we devote a good like 5-10 minutes on your particular topic, use this email address. If you have a really cool demo, if you've built something with Semantic Kernel and you want to show it off to the world, use this email address. I'll be including this email address as part of our blogs for the recorded versions of these sessions. Okay, so if you miss it here, don't worry. I'm going to see it every week. But if you want to have dedicated time during the office hours, or if you want to catch us outside of these hour sessions each week, that'll be the best way to kind of communicate with us if you're not already using Discord. Okay. And then this can kind of be the last one. Monik asks, is this issue fixed? Oh, it's an issue I created. So yeah, there was a regression in our handlebars planner. There used to be a Git helper that allowed it to work with for loops. There was a regression where it was removed at some point. We need to. We're still getting work on getting this prioritized and on our backlog, but hopefully in the next sprint or so we can get it fixed. So unfortunately, it is not fixed yet, but it's very top of mind for me so that the handlebars planer can work as expected.
What is the workaround, Matt? So while this issue is being fixed?
That is a great question. I think. Let me do some work on my side to see if I can do some hacks to maybe work. It's frankly a little bit difficult since you can't customize the planner prompt yet, and it needs a few shot example using the get method, which also was kind of removed as part of this regression. I guess what I've been doing is I've just not been using for loops in the handlebars right now since they just kind of don't work.
This is even without for loops, it's not working for us. A simple API call.
Okay. Do you mind adding an example to the issue?
We will, I think. So yeah, it was very similar to what we saw on GitHub, but we were not using a for loop. It was a simple API call with a JSON returning a single value, and we saw the getter was not being invoked in the plan.
Oh, y'all were using it to get like a specific value of the property. Yeah.
Yes.
If you don't mind adding an example, one of the reasons I'm asking for an example is it'll be nice to know to make sure it actually works. Okay. And then two, to prevent regressions like this in the future, we want to add obviously like integration tests. And we can actually add your example as a test to make sure.
Do you want us to comment on the same GitHub issue or raise a new issue?
Yeah, it's same issue, add a comment. That's great.
In the interim, if you return it as text plain, would it work instead of JSON output?
Yes, I get the challenge is making sure that the planner knows to do that. And right now, kind of the prompt that we give the planner, it thinks very heavily that it should always be JSON.
Okay.
Based on your particular problem, like if you're not doing the for loop stuff, you're doing something different, I might have a hack for you. But yeah, share your example and we can have that conversation on the side.
Thank you.
Cool. And then, okay, this is going to be the last question. We're closing the doors. How does this Semantic Kernel SDK relate to whatever SDK is used to build the various Microsoft Copilot tools? So Microsoft has like the Copilot stack, right? And in the middle of it, there's an orchestrator. In the early days, before Semantic Kernel was super established and was enterprise grade and all the great things we like to talk about, a lot of teams within Microsoft went ahead and created their own kind of orchestrator. We are now reaching back out to those teams and saying, hey, if you want all the whiz-bang things that Semantic Kernel offers, you probably want to move. So that's one category of copilots. Then there's all like these new copilots that are spinning up. A lot of them in like Power Platform land. Those are using Semantic Kernel behind the scenes in order to achieve kind of the interaction pattern. And then the last kind of bucket I would share is internally, we're also creating copilots like help us write code, write documentation, to check bugs, basically to increase dev productivity within Microsoft. And that is the main team that is building those tools within Microsoft are using Semantic Kernel. So we have quite a few teams within Microsoft that's using Semantic Kernel. We don't have any kind of public documentation that says that this is the canonical list, because as you can imagine, folks are kind of cagey about what their technology stack looks like. But rest assured, we're starting to get a healthy number of teams within Microsoft actually taking a dependency on Semantic Kernel, which is frankly different than 6 months ago. 6 months ago, we had like a wishy-washy, like, they're using the same ideas as us. But now we can more confidently say, yes, folks are using us. Alrighty. Well, thank you all for joining this week's office hours. I'll see you next week. And again, if you have any questions in the meantime, I've been trying to be fairly active in the Discord. If you really want my attention, you can always mention me. And then my cell phone does a little alert and buzz, and I go, oh, what's going on? And then, of course, you can use this SK office hours to let us know if there's anything in particular you want to chat with us during office hours. All righty. Thanks, y'all. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.